can pronounce that Rwanda is doing a big mistake in Congo. I'm very sorry, we will vote a very strong resolution on Thursday, and I really hope, Commissioner and Council, that you can clearly state that Rwanda is doing mistakes and criminals over in Congo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Woutmans. I do note that this is not a point of order. However, I understand that the feelings in this debate are high. With this, we conclude this debate and we move on to the next one, the political crisis in Serbia. So, first of all, I would like to welcome a delegation from the National Assembly of the Republic of Serbia, who is in the European Parliament for a very special occasion. And I would like to welcome you all to the European Parliament. We are very happy to have you here among us. For me and for many other people, all the countries in the Balkans, including Serbia, are part of the European space, and we await for you in the European Union. We would like to start this debate with the Council's declarations. Minister Švapka, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, honourable members, Madam Commissioner, dear guests from Serbia. We welcome this timely debate and thank the European Parliament for holding it. We follow the protest of Serbia's youth and other citizens who have joined them in exercising their democratic rights across the country. Serbia is the candidate country with an EU membership perspective and negotiating the accession. In this capacity, it is subject to particular scrutiny related to the implementation of the rule of law reforms and respect of fundamental rights. Serbia has undertaken commitments in this regard to promote the values on which the EU is founded, namely the respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law and respect for human rights. Everyone should have a right to freedom of peaceful assembly and freedom of association at all levels. Acts that undermine these rights, including reported incidents against demonstrators, must be addressed promptly and decisively. The Council will continue to follow the situation in Serbia closely, and I just would like to underline that enlargement is still priority for the Polish presidency, also in Western Balkan direction. Thank you very much.
Herzlichen Dank, Herr Minister. Das Wort erhält nun für die Kommission.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now on behalf of the Commission, Marta Kos.
Honourable members of the European Parliament, the Commission has been following very closely the current political situation in Serbia and the large mobilisation of students joined by other groups of citizens following the tragic incident of the Novi Sad railway station. Citizens' participation, transparency and accountability play a vital role in the development of democratic societies. As underlined in my open letter published last week as an answer to the numerous letters which the Commission received, fundamental values are at the core of our common European project, which the European Union expects all candidate countries to embrace and respect. This includes freedom of assembly, which should be exercised peacefully and in accordance with the law. No violence should be tolerated, and we expect the Serbian police to continue ensuring the safety of demonstrators. The Commission has expressed concerns about the incidents against demonstrators that have been witnessed, and we expect a full, impartial and speedy investigation into these attacks. Language inciting violence and lack of mutual respect also cannot be the solution. We have expressed concerns about the authorities' treatment of a group of peaceful civil society activists from EU member states and candidate countries who were detained and later asked by the authorities to leave Serbia for representing a security risk. We have also expressed concerns about reports of illegal access to personal data of citizens and activists and publication of such data. This is not acceptable and needs to be followed up by the competent national authorities. Furthermore, spreading disinformation, hostile political rhetoric, including against the EU, against our citizens, against some respectful members of the European Parliament, and lately against EU delegation, which holds dialogue to political and civil society stakeholders, has no place and will have no place on the path to EU integration. In these circumstances, it is important that the conditions are established for an inclusive dialogue involving all stakeholders, political actors, institutions, members of civil society and students and professors to address the concerns and achieve consensus on the reforms that are necessary for the European future of Serbia. This will strengthen Serbian society and consolidate Serbia's future within the EU. It remains the Commission's priority to support Serbia in advancing on its European path and become part of the European Union. But the path to EU membership encompasses reforms which enshrine our values not only in legislation but also in practice. And what is important, it is precisely Serbia's path towards the European Union that offers solutions to many of the issues that are in the heart of the requests of the protesters in Serbia today. The reforms which we want to see during the accession process will strengthen the fight against corruption, ensure the independence of the judiciary, accountability of institutions and transparent public procurement, promote media freedom and pluralism and improve electoral conditions. They should also ensure an enabling environment for civil society and build resilience against disinformation and information manipulation. All this represents the European way of Serbia, as it was well noted in the latest country progress report. If properly implemented, these reforms will have a transformative power that will benefit all citizens of Serbia and bring their country to the European Union. Serbia's leadership has repeatedly committed to these reforms. We are looking forward to the implementation of these commitments. In this geopolitical situation, EU member states ask also progressive alignment with the CFCP, and they have all legitimate right to ask for that, as we are expecting that future member states stand with us defending the principles of rules-based multilateral order. The EU accession process is now more political, more gradual, but also reversible. That is why it requires an intense effort by the entire society. It needs to be a national project owned by everyone, the government, the parliament, the opposition, civil society, every region, town and village, and ultimately every single citizen in the country. Dear honourable members, as you know, the European Commission regularly assesses the situation in Serbia, pointing to all the challenges and open issues very clearly, including in our annual enlargement package report. We will continue engaging with the authorities and all stakeholders, political actors and civil society to support the necessary reforms on Serbia's path to the EU for the benefit of all the citizens and the whole Serbian society.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Kommissarin. Für die EPP-Fraktion erhält.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. For the EPP Group, Mr. Stier.
Here and in the gallery, let me begin by expressing our solidarity with the victims and the families of the 15 people killed on November 1st after the collapse of the train station canopy in Novi Sad. Since that tragic moment, massive protests have been taking place in Serbia requesting accountability and the full disclosure of the documents related to the reconstruction of the train station, a job given to the China Railway International Company. These massive protests led by students are the largest demonstrations since the fall of Milosevic. It is important to reiterate on this occasion that students have the right to peaceful demonstration. This essential democratic right should not be curtailed. On the contrary, the authorities have the obligation to guarantee transparency and accountability and consequently to restore citizens' confidence in state institutions. Confidence-building measures are essential for a much-needed inclusive process of dialogue among political and social actors. All stakeholders are expected to contribute to this dialogue, a dialogue conducive to a plural and free society, with free media and independent judiciary, a dialogue based on the respect of the rule of law, a key component of the EU accession negotiations. We look forward to a European Serbia reconciled with itself and with its neighbours. While our aim is to contribute to this goal, we are also fully aware that it is up to the Serbs as a sovereign nation to decide and shape its future. We cannot impose to the authorities to align with the EU positions, nor we can impose to the students to fly the European flags in the streets and the squares of Serbia. Yet, we want them to know that a nation truly embracing and aligning with the European values can always count on the support of this Parliament. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Für die S&D-Fraktion spricht jetzt der Kollege Pitzl.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pitzler for S&D Group.
Thank you. Commissioner, dear colleagues, the tragedy in Novi Sad, something that led to many demonstrations which spread all over Serbia, where people were asking for the respect of democratic standards. I will express my support once again to all the young people that are now demonstrating in Serbia. It is a political crisis, and a political crisis needs a political solution. This cannot be just expelling citizens of the European Union and accusing them of interference. If there are changes, they always need to be done according to the principles of OSCE and OESS. And the reports of the Commission point to the problems, but there are some European leaders who are there to praise the progression. We really need to do something for democratic institutions and for the justice, because the European Union is not only a market, not for a long time, but also.
Thank you. For the PFE Group, it'll be Mrs. Vicek. Madam Commissioner, colleagues, the stability of the candidate countries is in the essential interests of the European Union. So it's very important that we focus on the situation in Serbia. Members of Parliament have to be objective and respect the sovereignty of the country. For weeks now, there have been demonstrations on the streets. Then these have started with the tragic collapse of the canopy of the Novi Sad station. In the meantime, politicians have accepted their share of responsibility, and despite all of the resignations, the demonstrations have continued and more groups are getting involved. Educational institutes are seeing their doors closed, and the people are not going to work. The people who suffer as a result of this are the school pupils and students. They have a right to education, because their right to education is being weakened because they simply have not been able to go to school in this time. It's very difficult to speak objectively about the situation. Of course, people have a right to hold demonstrations, but we must ensure that political debate does not take place on the streets, but rather in Parliament. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Siriani for the ECR.
La situazione in Serbia oggi è il risultato di anni di...
The situation in Serbia today comes after years of uncertainty. On the one hand, they are walking towards the EU, but actions speak otherwise. These protests have led to the quitting by the Prime Minister after the crisis in Novi Sad. Serbia is strategic in the Balkans, and they need to concretely carry out reforms and to speed up their accession process, not slow it down. The question is, what do we want to do with Serbia? Do we want to speed up their accession or leave them in a gray area? Because if we decide not to decide, then we shouldn't be surprised if Belgrade has greater links with the United Arab Emirates, China, and Russia, while its citizens have growing indifference towards Europe. Politics require choices. Whether we work with Serbia for a credible accession path or we abandon a strategic partner in an area that's crucial for our safety and security. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Für die Renew-Fraktion spricht der Kollege Brandstätter.
On behalf of the Renew Group, Mr. Brandstätter.
Madam President, Madam Commissioner, Minister, thank you very much. I would like also to express my deepest condolences with the victims of the Novi Sad tragedy. And here's the point. It has to be investigated, but people do not believe that Vučić allows a real investigation. What the people want and why they go on the street, they want rule of law, they want freedom of speech, they want expressed without intimidation and violence. And what people in Serbia tell me, they don't want to see Vučić every night to see on television to say the same things. Sometimes people get fed up with that. The students are protesting because they want rule of law, they want transparency, they are fighting for their future and for their country, and they can be proud for their commitment. The UN Parliament, we stand for these young people, and Ms. Kohl, thank you very much for your clear expression, but I'm afraid not everybody in the Commission sees it like you. I think the Commission has to be very clear to Mr. Vučić. If we want to be part of the European Union, it's with rule of law, it's with the freedom of media, it's with all the possibilities that people can live in freedom and peace. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Für die Fraktion der Grünen spricht jetzt der Kollege.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Greens, Mr. Prebilic.
Spoštovane gospe in gospodje.
Ladies and gentlemen, the European Union is based on the democracy, rule of law, and human rights. And those are the values that the young people in Serbia are fighting for today. They went to the streets to warn about systemic corruption, the denial of political accountability, and their voice is clear. They want a country that respects European values. And we can look up to them when it comes to this. The tragedy in Novi Sad shook the Serbian community, but the real tragedy would be if Europe would just remain silent and watch this. Today is not the time to be silent. It is the time to call on Serbian authorities to do reforms and respect the human rights. The Serbian nation and this country deserve a fair future. The EU will do anything in its power to do so, but the actions of the Serbian authorities are still lacking. If you want to ensure a fair country, the politicians have to put the responsibilities and interests of its nation in front of their own interests, and it is time to do so in Serbia.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Left Group, Mr. Arbanitis.
Good evening, dear colleagues. Unfortunately, Serbia is in an erosive destabilization phase with corruption and fundamental values moving away from democracy. However, Serbia has a prospect towards the European Union. We have committed to support Serbia, but we need to apply certain requirements, and the key requirement is the rule of law, and Serbia is not doing very well on that front. Once again, the leadership of the EU seems to be awkward before the developments in the Western Balkans. Instead of working intensely with Serbia on rule of law and institutional reforms in order to reinforce the path of the country towards the European Union. We have abandoned the country to its fate. Our European Union should send a clear message, not a wrong message. Thank you.
Danke. Für die ESN-Fraktion erhält nun das.
Thank you for the ESN group, Mr. Bistron.
Dragi gości, Frau Präsidentin, liebe Kollegen.
Madam President, colleagues, the unrest in Serbia over the last few weeks is part of a globalist network that is organizing protests around the world. Donald Trump is putting an end to all of this. It's got rid of the CIA front organization of US aid. There have been attempts to see a regime change in countries like Georgia and Ukraine, and now we see they're trying to do it in Slovakia and Serbia. There's little need for unrest in Serbia because the country is in a better situation than most of the rest of the Western Balkans. Serbia says clearly that it wants to join the EU, but is not closed to Russia and China, and thanks to that they're receiving a foreign investment at a level that other countries can only dream of. The globalists don't want any independent nations. They want loyal vassals. But Serbia is a proud people. They will not be dictated to as to how they should govern their country and who they should have friendly relationships with. So therefore, no intervention, no destabilization, no forced regime change for Serbia. If the regime is to change, that should take place in democratic elections, not in externally staged protests.
Damit beschließen wir die Runde der Fraktionssprecher.
Well, that concludes the round of group speakers. So I'll be a little bit stricter with time.
Das Wort hat jetzt der Kollege Furlas.
The next speaker, Mr. Furlas.
Sorry.
Κύριε Πρόεδρε, κύριε Επίτροπε.
President, Commissioner, I would like to welcome our friends from Serbia who are here following this discussion. I would like to reassure them that as President of the delegation with Serbia, I'm doing my best in order to persuade everybody that Serbia needs Europe and the European Union has a lot to gain with Serbia. The path of Serbia towards Europe is a must. I know very well the domestic situation, and I am among those who believe that the path towards the European Union is the only path forward. I won't mention any details about the chapters of the negotiations that have opened or will open. I will only say that a lot has to be done, and this is why we are here, in order to achieve that. Serbia is one of the pillars of stability in the area of Western Balkans. Serbia belongs to the family of the EU. Democracy and the rule of law is the only answer to any problem and any challenge. I am certain, dear colleagues, that Serbian people know what they have to do in order to lead their country towards the EU, and we will stand by them in this effort. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Nächste Rednerin ist die Kollegin Moretti.
Thank you very much. The next colleague is Mrs. Moretti.
Stato di diritto.
Rule of law, the fight against corruption, the right to protest, independence of the judiciary. This is why so many students have been peacefully protesting over the last few months. So they are asking Serbia to clear things up about Novi Sad and create a country free of corruption. This is a grassroots action from the bottom up, from young people who are not part of a political party, and yet we European politicians have to express our support to these peaceful protesters, since their requests are the same of those for Serbia's EU accession. Let us give a voice to these young people and show them that there's a way for the government to give an answer to their requests, and that the government should tackle corruption, and that the judiciary should take up its responsibility for the Novi Sad tragedy, all peacefully and respectful of the right to protest, which is a part of all democracies. Thank you.
Schön. Nächster Redner ist der Kollege Mariani.
Mr. Mariani is next.
Of course, we need to tackle corruption, and those responsible for the Novi Sad events must be identified. But the European Parliament is once again showing itself to be hypocritical. It is pushing a debate which only has to do with the internal affairs of Serbia and concealing its silence as regards the anti-Serb attacks in Kosovo. For example, in January, Albin Kurti, the Socialist Prime Minister, closed 10 Serb municipalities, signing off an additional attack of political harassment, an attack on the fundamental rights of the Serb people of that area. 9th of February, a few weeks off the vote, the Central Electoral Commission in Kosovo, on orders from Pristina, tried to ban the main Serb party from standing for election. So following the physical violence, the administrative constraints and the institutional discrimination, for the Serbs of Kosovo, it's a lot to take. They know that this is part of ethnic cleaning, underhand cleaning, which has been going on for 4 years. And here the EU is turning a blind eye. These injustices and violence must be stopped. It is high time for the EU to acknowledge that we too need to stop our repeated interference by judging and criticising a democratically elected government which has the right to run its own politics, even if you don't like it.
Next Redner ist der Kollege Sturza.
Next speaker, Mr. Sturza.
Stimată doamnă președinte,
Madam Chair, dear colleagues, in the past few months, we have had the opportunity of noticing that democracy in Serbia is fully functional. Citizens have demonstrated their civic spirit, and a clear message has been given to political elites. They have had to take into account the will of the people and recalibrate Serbia's European path. Taking into account the fact that the European Union is Serbia's main political and economic partner, the authorities in Belgrade should accelerate their efforts for implementing European acquis. European integration is a strategic objective for Serbia, and this is why it requires certain actions. I would like to today speak about the plight of Romanian ethnic minorities in Serbia. Their rights should be respected the same as all the other minorities' rights in Serbia. We need to give the Serbs a very clear message that they should fight against corruption and organized crime. They should fight for the rule of law and democratic values. Thank you.
Next Redner ist der Kollege Tomak.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tomak is next.
Doamnă președinte,
Chair, dear colleagues, Commissioner, innocent people had to die in the Novi Sad tragedy for us to point out a justified discontent of Serbian citizens. As a democratic institution, the most representative of the European Union, the European Parliament must be on the side of voices who expect changes in the Serbian society. The government has shown during the last year that its approach is one of a double standard. They say to understand the European path, but they still stay very faithful to the relationship with the Russian Federation, and this double standard cannot work, and Serbians are eager to give up this double standard and to apply the rules governing throughout whole Europe. This is what the politicians in Belgrade have to understand, and therefore we must be on the side of these voices of hope from Serbia. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Nächster Redner ist der Kollege Bosanat.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Bosanat.
Predsjednica Europske komisije posjetila je u listopadu 24.
President von der Leyen went to Serbia with the plan of growth, and she said in a press conference with Mr. Vučić that Serbia has committed to reforms, especially on the basis of the rule of law and democracy. And then she told the president, and you have shown that your acts are really what you were saying. And she was really utterly wrong there, because all those who went to the streets, who took to the streets, were showing that there were problems. How come the president of the Commission said something like that? She made a mistake, because she then, in Serbian citizens, found many who became skeptical towards the European Union, because she gave support to the wrong side. Now it's high time to support the right side. There wouldn't have been problems in the at the railway station in Novi Sad had everything been according to the rules in Serbia.
Mass mobilizations for the 14 dead people in Novi Sad, demonstrations, and the crime in Tembi happened in Greece. In the same way in Serbia, the security of the passengers was sacrificed in the balance cost and profit. In spite of the criterion for progress that were made by the European Commission for Serbia, Mr. Vučić resigned, but not because he wanted to take his to say that he is responsible. He didn't want to cover the accident as the government tries in Greece. The people in Novi Sad are angry, and this anger has to be taken into account. The capital state could not be indifferent to the tragedy. In Serbia, in Greece, and everywhere, the works that are done in the railways are taken by various big companies, and with the profit as its aim. It's either their profits or our lives. This is the response of the young people in Greece who are going to have a demonstration on the 28th of February and going on strike 2 years after the tragedy in Tempe.
Thank you, President. Dear colleagues, we stand at a pivotal moment for Serbia, a cornerstone country for the Western Balkans, with significant impact to the security and stability of the region, but of whole Europe. The tragic collapse of Novi Sad railway station, canopy, which claimed 15 lives, ignited a wave of protests, which have become now a big movement. Initially started by students, but now step by step with supporters from many sectors of the society. The protesters believe the incident was a consequence of systemic corruption, and their demands are for accountability and transparency. I think they need support, and in response to these demonstrations, Prime Minister Milos Vučević has resigned, stating his intent to defuse tensions. So what is necessary now? Serbian leaders have to engage in an open dialogue with this protest movement. The path forward must be paved with transparency and steadfast commitment. This is a condition for Serbia's EU integration to continue in a positive way. Italian Minister Tajani mentioned yesterday he sees Serbia in 2029 in the European Union. I'm not that optimistic, but I hope he is right. So Serbia has to continue with its reform agenda, which is absolutely necessary for a future in the European Union.
Dankeschön. Nächster Redner ist der Kollege Reuten.
Thank you, Mr. Reuten.
President, Commission, Member States, colleagues. This Parliament shares the students' demands and hopes for the future of Serbia. The students and all the Serbs that support them want change, and change is badly needed. Autocratic tendencies in Serbia have only increased. But what are they asking? The students are not asking for dialogue on the rule of law, but for its implementation. And ironically, they are suffering precisely this lack of implementation and also convincing reforms. We need EU institutions to reflect on why years of European support have not led to real change. My input to Commission and Member States: engage with the Serbian government based on our stated democratic values, treat the Serbian government based on its actions, verified, implemented reforms and public statements, not backdoor promises of regional stability and future reforms. And without all this, we should not congratulate dear Alexander, but be honest to the public. Words mean nothing when the underpinnings of democracy are being removed quietly. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Es spricht als nächstes der
Thank you. Mr. Kuchuk.
Благодаря, госпожо председател. Уважаема госпожо комисар.
Thank you very much, President. Minister, Commissioner, the European Commission has a solid position, but this has failed in previous years. Yes, Serbia has to choose a way forwards. It can't be between two stools. So if they want to take a European path forwards, then they need to adopt the common foreign and security policy. They also need to tackle crime and corruption. It cannot just remain something on paper or in speeches. When politicians are under pressure, citizens must have freedom of speech. And then there's regional cooperation. And yes, Serbia does have a place in the European Union, but not this Serbia, but another Serbia which upholds the freedom of every citizen.
The other day I wrote from world-famous artist Marina Abramovic on her social media that the students of Serbia are the heroes of today. And they are. They are, and the protests are indeed something that should call us to stand up and stand next to them. Because what is the protest about? It's about fighting corruption. It's fighting for transparency, for accountability, and for democracy. So let's step up, both in the Commission, in this House, and also in the Council. Step up and be on the side of the future, be on the side of the heroes, because the heroes are in the streets right now in Serbia, and they are fighting for European values. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Nächster Redner ist der Kollege.
Thank you. Mr. Tarr.
Tisztelt elnök asszony, tisztelt biztos asszony.
President, Commissioner, dear colleagues, over recent months, 10,000 young people have said that they've had enough of corruption, of the dreadful corruption, and they have recognized that corruption is not just about the theft of money, it is also about human lives. The tragedy in Novi Sad has cost 15 human lives, as we have heard, and this was no coincidence. This is a systematic problem. Money and power are regarded as more important than people's well-being and security. This is why investment has been so low. We're familiar with this system. We live in a similar system ourselves. In Hungary, we know what it means when public money loses its public character. The hypocritical Vučić regime has lost credibility. It's like Orban's regime. They are interfering in the internal affairs of other countries. It's a policy which is only based on the interests of individuals. It must be running out of steam in Serbia as it is in Hungary. We know that change is happening in the community, and this is not just a political issue, it's about the future. The young people are sending a message. They're saying that the country is not for sale and the future is not for sale. Thank you. Mr. Namek.
Spoštovani visoki zbor, glasom od...
Dear colleagues, the loud voice of Serbian students' demands must be echoed in what EU demands from Serbian authorities. Fighting peaceful protests by thousands against the decades-long dismantling of democratic institutions, the rule of law, trampling of fundamental rights of their own people, and of course nationalism. It should not be ignored that this is a historic mobilization of young people since the fall of the Milosevic regime. It is therefore imperative that the authorities provide a safe space for these rallies. Any intimidation and politically motivated violence against protesters, including the deportation of foreign nationals, must be condemned. And above all, it is imperative that those in power listen to the criticisms and demands of the people in the streets. So far, they have not. Serbia is now facing a serious test. Change is inevitable, and the solution lies in a transitional technical government that will then have democratic elections. We, citizens, dear friends from Serbia, we are listening to you, we hear you, and we stand by you. Thank you, and good luck.
Banners, slogans, whistles, blockades, an endless crowd of people growing larger and larger and becoming more determined. These are the streets of Serbia today. This is a Serbia that will no longer be silent, except for those heartbreaking 15 minutes. 15 minutes of silence that has never been so loud before, a message that has never been so clear. Young people are the driving force of change, day after day, week after week. That has been the case in Serbia since November, and they are no longer alone. The baton has now been taken over by the younger and older ones, high school students, parents, professors, artists, pensioners, war veterans, farmers, the civil society in general. All are united in the desire for a comprehensive change of the system that is completely imbued with corruption and nepotism. It is because they care, because they refuse to be part of a system that has been destroying their dreams for years, destroying their future.
Udžbenike o borbi protiv, kako je rekao, obojenih revolucija, ali vi pišete udžbenik o pobedi. Zato nemojte odustati jer dobro pobeđuje zlo, jer narod koji traži pravdu ne može biti poništen I poražen. Poklon do podne.
Entschuldigung, please. I understand you want this symbol of speaking Serb, but nobody of the colleagues understands because there is no translation. So please stick to the languages that we translate. Thank you. Nächster Redner ist der Kollege.
So the next speaker is Mr. Tonin.
Podpredsednica, komisarka.
Madam Chair, Madam Commissioner, dear colleagues, we have been witnessing the power and determination of young people in Serbia. They do not demand to be in power. They demand a different future. They demand a European Serbia. The Serbian students are the voice, the hope, and the conscience of the entire Balkan region. The authoritarian tendencies that have its face in corruption, abuse of power, and impact in media are not only the problem of Serbia. This is a trend that is happening in the entire region. Politicians with authoritarian tendencies are trying to help each other. Corruption kills is the main message of the Serbian youth. Corruption kills, literally. Corruption kills the creative force of society. Corruption kills the rule of law. The European values and democracy are not something that is given forever, not even in the member states. The mayor of Ljubljana, Zoran Jankovic, has written an open letter to Serbian President Mr. Vučić and offered his complete support. This is a message that is entirely wrong in the given time. And we can read it as denying the problems that are now happening in Serbia. If anything, Serbia needs a European future, and that is why it's our duty in this House to help Serbia on its path to the European Union. And the duty of its president is to solve problems in a European way.
Thank you, Mr. Schieder.
Sehr geehrte Damen und
Ladies and gentlemen, well, more than 100 days have passed since the tragedy in Novi Sad. And since that day, there have been protests across the whole country. The people who are going out onto the streets are not hooligans. No, they're normal citizens who peacefully are demonstrating for the rule of law. So they deserve our full solidarity. It's important that we express that. But although these are peaceful protests, the police are breaking the demonstrations up violently. This violence has to be put an end to by Mr. Vučic's government. We need functioning institutions and the rule of law in Serbia. It's a country that finally should cease to be corrupt. And unfortunately, Mr. Vučić has achieved a sad record. It's in the top 3 of the most corrupt states in Europe. And students in Serbia don't want that anymore, and we'll stand by their side.
Thank you, Mr. Barna.
As a Romanian, the collapse of the Novi Sad train station and the loss of innocent life reminds me of a well-known tragedy in our own country. The tragedy in the nightclub Colectiv in 2015 still haunts our society and is a reminder of the price of corruption and negligence. It's been 9 years since this tragedy happened in Bucharest. Back then, 64 people died. Romania protested in the streets, demanded change, and continues to mourn. We see the same patterns in Serbia, the same painful patterns: ignoring rules, lack of accountability, a corrupt system that cannot protect its own citizens. Novi Sad train station, a symbol of progress, has become a tomb. From the European Parliament, we demand that those guilty for this tragedy be held accountable. We demand transparency and rule of law. We demand the freedom of assembly, which should be protected, not suppressed. President Vučić must understand that his people wants change, and it is the EU's duty to support the people in its desire for change. Thank you.
Thank you. The last speaker on the list is Mr. Sok.
Vice President, Commissioner, colleagues, Serbia is an autocratic state where Aleksandar Vučić and his party rule in all segments of the society. Media are controlled, political freedoms are restricted. Serbia actually wants to be friends with Russia, China and the European Union, but at the same time they want to exert influence in the neighborhood. A particular problem is what they do in Montenegro, because they want to have their influence there too. They violate their constitution and they want to have a new law in Montenegro which would actually put an end to an independent state in Montenegro. Unfortunately, there was support from the Western countries because they favored Vučić for many years. The problem is that there is no perspective now in Serbia. The tragedy in Novi Sad sparked the demonstrations, but there are many other problems. The problem is that this country has never accepted responsibility for their own failures in history. Only after they realize they will have no hegemony on the Balkans, they will be able to think about a serious European perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings us to Catch the Eye. We've got 5 speakers. The first is Mr. Kelly, and Mr. Papandreou will be in a second.
I'm totally in favour of enlargement of the European Union. In fact, it's far too long since Croatia joined over 11 years ago. But countries must come up to standard if they want to join the European Union. And that's questionable in relation to Serbia, particularly in relation to the protests which students and others are taking part now for some time, since the collapse of Novi Sad railway station undertaken by a Chinese state consortium. So, that being the case, I think the Commissioner is right. Not only must they make changes in terms of law, but they must make changes particularly in relation to action. And violence against protesters who are entitled to freedom of assembly is not part of what we stand for. So I think the Commission has to say to the Serbian state, we are going to pause negotiations in relation to your accession until we are satisfied that the standards have been reached, because one Putin puppet, Viktor Orban, is enough in Europe.
Thank you
very much, Mr. Papandreou. And Mr. Tinkinen is next.
Mikro bitte 631.
631.
Chair, President Slabka and Commissioner Kos, Let's see where we are now. We had two very good statements from the President and the Commissioner, but we went one step more. I would say most of us here are giving a message to the Serbians. The message is we're listening to you. We're listening to your demand for accountability. We are listening to your calls for corruption. And that they're on the streets might be proof of democracy, but it's democracy that wants change. In fact, the people in the streets are very inspiring. They remind us, President Slapka, of 1989 in Poland. They bring back memories for us here that are very exciting. So the message from the Parliament today, 80% are saying we want to be on the right side of history when it comes to Serbia. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Das Wort erhält der Kollege Tynkin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tinkinen. And Mr. Zieper can prepare.
Microphone 210, please.
Madam President, Serbia is facing yet another crisis, and not without a reason. After a tragic collapse of railway station structures causing several deaths, we have witnessed a strong movement against corruption in Serbia. Following massive student-led protests, the Prime Minister eventually resigned himself. A political crisis can sometimes act as a turning point for countries. It seems that Serbian youth is not satisfied with their country's path, filled with corruption, breaches of rule of law and disgraceful Russia sympathies. Serbia is a country that has been an EU candidate for already 13 years, a candidate that we all know is far from EU membership. I sincerely hope that the strong voice of the youth will change the course of Serbia for a better future. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Nächster Redner ist der Kollege Sieper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sieper. And Mr. Jovanovic can prepare.
Menschen Europas auch. The people of Europe and in Serbia too. Before I was elected to this parliament, I was a student. I was a student with a heart for politics, and I can say to you that that's not always easy. We live in a world in which the powerful are often our parents, and we are not heard. The problems that affect our society are often things that arose before we were born. But we students have always shown that we can also be at the forefront of change, that we can bear the flag of freedom. But, dear members, we cannot do it alone. And I would like to ask all of you to stand up now, stand by the side of the democratic movement in Serbia. Like the people in Serbia of all ages and all social backgrounds, stand by the side of the Serb students. And let us show Serbia together that it has a room here with us. And soon we will have some Serb students with us in the room too. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Und zum Abschluss spricht die Kollegin Jovanovic-Šošoka.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jovanovic-Šošoka.
Mulțumesc. Thank you. My paternal grandparents are from Serbia and from Macedonia, so I know very well what I'm talking about. You do not know anything about the Serbians. They're perhaps the bravest people in all of Europe. Most Serbians do not wish to be part of the EU. They've seen what happened to Romania and to what extent Romania has been destroyed. Most Serbians are friends with Russians, and this is something you do not like. What's happening right there right now is something akin to Maidan from Ukraine. You are not interested in that in 1989 NATO troops came into Serbia, into Yugoslavia, and bombarded churches where Serbian women and children were, and they killed them on Easter night with bombs that had written on them, Merry Easter. In fact, this is what the EU is doing, just like NATO. They destroy everything they touch. Europe is corrupt from the very tip, and you are talking about corruption in Serbia, the pot calling the kettle black. Kosovo is Serbia also. Please don't ever dare to talk about Kosovo, about its independence. Thank you.
Damit haben wir die Redeliste erschöpft. Wir haben nun...
Well, that concludes the speakers list. I will now give the floor to the Commission. Commissioner Koss, you have the floor.
Liebe Vizepräsidentin, honorable members,
The debate today illustrates the importance the EU attaches to its relations with Serbia as a candidate country negotiating its accession and to adherence to EU values in our candidate countries. Yes, I agree with you. EU is not only a common market, it's a union of values, a union which respects human rights, freedom of media and the rule of law. And this is and will remain at the heart of the EU enlargement process, and implementation on the commitments, I use your words, not just words, will remain the precondition for the next steps in the accession process. I took good note of your concerns as regards the current political developments in the country and their impact on Serbia's European path. As I have stressed in my introductory remarks, it is precisely the reforms that are part of the EU accession process that offer solutions to the issues that dominate the current debate in Serbia and that have triggered the student protests. Therefore, I see and we should consider the protest of the students as an opportunity for Serbia to advance on its European path. We have a number of tools on our side to support and encourage these reforms. The accession process as such, the reform and growth facility, and our other means of financial and technical assistance. And we will continue to use all these tools, engaging with the authorities and stakeholders, addressing all open issues on its EU path in order to help Serbia to deliver on the required reforms on the basis of its strategic goal of EU integration. And let me conclude by emphasising that it is not for the EU to interfere into internal affairs of candidate countries, but it is in our interest to assist them on the path towards the EU based on the reforms that will transform the society and political system. Transformative reforms will make Serbia ready for joining the EU. One of you have asked, what do we want with Serbia? We want to see Serbia in the European Union. It is in our interest to bring democratic Serbia to the European family. This is also aspiration of the brave students and Serbian people.
Vielen Dank. Den Abschluss der Debatte bildet der Rat.
Thank you very much. To conclude the debate on behalf of the Council, Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President, honourable members, Madam Commissioner. Thank you very much for this debate. I heard your concerns regarding the political situation in Serbia and the repercussions for Serbia's European path, and I heard your support to Serbian people and Serbian European path. Please rest assured that we will continue to closely follow the domestic political situation in the country, and we will continue to support Serbia in its EU accession process in accordance with merit-based approach. As I said, this is among our Polish presidency priorities. The rule of law is fundamental rights, and fundamental rights are among the core values on which the EU is founded. A crucial respect of democratic transformation and indispensable requisite for progress towards EU membership. Freedom of assembly and of expression are a part of these core values. They need to be exercised peacefully and they need to be protected. Thank you very much.
Herzlichen Dank. Die Aussprache ist.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate. Next item of business is an oral question for an answer from the Commissioner. US AI chip export restrictions, a challenge to European AI development and economic resilience. And I will give the floor to the author, Mr. Budka, first of all.
Szanowni Państwo, Pani Komisarz.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Commissioner. On behalf of the ITRE Committee, it is my honour to put an oral question to you. This is all about the state of play in the AI sector and recent decisions by the United States, namely export restrictions on the most modern, the state-of-the-art AI chips. Now, this is a massive challenge for us in Europe's single market, and our resilience and technological sovereignty are also at stake. We're being divided into different categories, and that threatens the principle of equality of treatment and will also jeopardize the development of AI here in Europe. Hence my question to you. First of all, what implications will these restrictions have for our chip development, particularly the third pillar and surveillance and AI factories, and what kind of adaptation measures does the Commission have in mind? Second question, what does the Commission make of the potential adverse consequences for member states, and how will it mitigate those member states that are affected, and what does it plan to do to mitigate the adverse effects on technological developments generally in Europe? Thirdly, what about the production capacity of AI chips within the EU? How can we boost our output in order to reduce any implications for competitiveness? Fourthly, the competitive compass also covers measures for semiconductors. Does the Commission plan to